Hi. I'm going to be the only English speaker, so I apologize, and I think we're going to have translation. It's a real honor to be able to work here at Ancient Shiloh. I appreciate Liliana and Dove, my boss, Hanania, and Benny, the rest of the Kamat staff that's here, all the friends that we have. Probably half of you here, I know your names. The other half, I'm working on it, so have patience with me. So I want to talk for a few minutes about our findings from this last season and sort of the macro view of what we're doing here at Shiloh. As you know, this is the 100th anniversary of the Danish excavations. The history of excavations began back in 1922, but let me back up a little bit more from that. From our Danish friends, they've been sending me archival material from the National Museum. And, you know, I've been reading this, getting ready for the conference. It actually started in 1911 when A.J. Schmidt began to go to the Danish National Committee and to their parliament to request funding for an expedition to Shiloh. And he was quite persistent. And, of course, this thing called World War I came along, and that shut everything down. There was no dig. And then once the war had passed, then the effort started again. They were able to raise the money, and then finally in 1922, A.J. Schmidt brought a team, and they did probes here at Shiloh with Albright's help. They all identified some sequence and some stratigraphy, and then they brought a full team back in 1926 under the direction of Hans Kehr. They did several seasons of work trying to dig every 3 years, but then along came World War II. And ultimately, the tensions pre-World War II shut down the Danish excavation, and it wasn't then until 1963 that Hולם-Nilsson came back and did a final season, and together with Marie-Louise Buhl, published the material and made it available. By our standards today, some of it we would say was a little bit primitive, but of course it's not fair for us to judge using our standards today. Any more than 100 years from now, people would look back and think that our methods were a bit primitive. So this was the first work done at the site, and then Bar-Ilan University came along in the 1980s and did 4 seasons. And since the early 80s, the civil administration has been doing ongoing work here at Shiloh. Our excavation is part of that larger work of the Kamat, and we have completed 4 seasons of excavation so far at Ancient Shiloh, projecting maybe 6 to 8 more seasons that we will need to finish the initial goals that we had of understanding what was going on the northern slope of Ancient Shiloh in biblical times. And this is Jorgen that we were talking about just a moment ago. He's a strong 75 years old. He's working with us out there from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, quite vigorous. And yes, the joke is that the Danish left him here and we found him. But he's quite an amazing fella. So stop by this next summer and you'll get to meet Jorgen. I want to say a few words about the Amarna letters. We sometimes say that Shiloh is only mentioned in the biblical account, and it's true. We do have a number of biblical passages that mention ancient Shiloh, but I'd like to suggest to you that we may have a mention in the Amarna letters as well. We have a series of letters from the ruler of Jerusalem, and essentially he is complaining about the Habiru, according to Nadav Naman and many other scholars. This might be the Hebrews. Other scholars, of course, would disagree with this. But if scholars such as Nadav Naman are correct, then we're talking about the Hebrews here, and the possibility that Silu that is mentioned in Al-Amarna 288, I think, should be considered. Now, Albright and later Rainey talked about this being Churu, or a fort down in Egypt. Now, if you've read the Amarna letters, this is totally out of context, because all of the Amarna letters are either from Mesopotamian sites, Syrian sites, or Canaanite Bronze Age city-states. There's not a single letter from Egypt. So to argue that this one letter is from a fort down in Egypt is very much out of context. So I would suggest that we should start thinking about Silu in EA 288 as being Shiloh. So it reads thusly, "Behold, Turbasu was slain in the city gate of Silu. The king did nothing," complaining about Pharaoh not intervening. "Behold, servants who were joined to the Habiru," possibly the Hebrews, "smote Zimreda of Lachisu," possibly Lachish, and Yapith Hada was slain in the city gate of Silu. The king did nothing. Why has he not called them into account? Now, if you read all these Amarna letters, this is what they are. They are complaining to Pharaoh that he must do something or he's going to lose all of his territories, all of his colonies here in Canaan. So we have two people called by name and perhaps a third, and at least two of them are killed in the city gate of Shiloh. So along with the biblical references in 1 Samuel 3, 1 Samuel 4, to the gate of Shiloh, there has always been great interest in this. So we began uncovering on the northern slope back in 2018 what appeared to be possibly a city gate or a postern gate or an opening at least. I think we've all thought that the main gate of Shiloh would be on the south under the current ruins, but we don't know. Maybe in the Byzantine and Roman era they may have scraped all the way down to bedrock and perhaps there's not even going to be anything left there, but perhaps there is, but we don't yet know on the south. But it always seemed to me that there would be a second gate because the spring of Shiloh, Ein Sailun, is 1 kilometer to the north of the site. And the idea that we're going to carry water all the way around the site every day seemed a bit illogical. So when we began to see this opening in the wall that was perfectly symmetrical, it caught my attention. And then we had glacis that came up to a certain point and it stopped with a very large Bronze Age wall and no glacis. So there has to be a reason. Why do we have no glacis? Why do we have a symmetrical opening in the wall here? So we continued to excavate, and after removing a tremendous amount of material this season, this is what we got down to. You can see the piers, 4 very large stones on each side, creating a feed into this somewhat symmetrical opening. So this is a hypothesis at this period, but this is what we do. We create hypotheses and then we test them to see if they're true. But if this is the case, then this would look something like this. You would have an opening from the north coming into an inner chamber in the gate and then leading up into the city. Of course, more excavation will be required to see if we can establish this. But for now, it does appear that we have an opening on the northern side of the site. And so along with this and rethinking the idea of Al-Amarna 288, perhaps the gate of Shiloh will become more clear in the coming seasons. Now, Aaron just spoke about the possible locations of the tabernacle, and I enjoyed his talk very much. But there are basically, from my point of view, 5 possibilities. The northern platform, which he, of course, talked about Charles Wilson and the later work that was done there, why that might be a possibility. I would point out that the Danish, Hans Kier, did not believe that, nor did Professor Finkelstein when Bar Ilan was here believe that. They favored the summit as a location, and so there is a lot of interest in the summit as well, but to date, no ruins have been found that would establish that. The southern approach is another possibility. As you know, there are the remains of 5 churches on the southern approach, so it seems that the Christians in the Byzantine period had a lot of interest in venerating that southern approach. It's flat, it's open. The problem with the southern approach and the northern platform is that they're both outside the fortification, so you would be leaving the sacred shrine of Israel unprotected. I introduced another possibility several years ago in an article that I wrote that perhaps the Mishkan, being mobile by its very nature, it could be moved around, may have been mobile at Shiloh. The whole site was seen as sacred, not just one particular parcel of land. Being a tent, it could easily be moved. And based on our excavations, I think we have another possibility on the northern slope in areas H1 and K1, and that is the building that we are uncovering there, a monumental building, walls 1.2 meters wide, perfectly aligned east-west, divided on a 2-to-1 ratio, which of course you would have in the Mishkan between holy and most holy space. Now again, more excavation is required. This is a hypothesis still at this point. If it's not directly related to the tabernacle, and it's iron 1, so it's no doubt that it would date to that period. If it's not directly related to the Mishkan, then we have to ask ourselves, what is it? If you have the tabernacle system operating at Shiloh during this period, then what are these monumental buildings? And so one way or another, it will be important to us to understand what was going on during the tabernacle period. And around this building, we have a number of cultic remains, ceramic pomegranates, which we published in Judea, Samaria. I see David here. Thank you, David, who co-authored this article with me. We have a favisa in Area D, which the Bar Ilan team excavated in the 1980s. They found a disproportionate ratio of bones from the right side of the animal to the left side of the animal. And this is very interesting. We, this last summer, were able to remove a balk in that area, in the immediate area around the balk. We uncovered thousands of bones. So it's just thick, bone on top of bone on top of bone. And then we have late Bronze Age pottery that is beautiful late Bronze Age pottery, painted, decorated, carinated bowls, the types of things that are characteristic of that time period. So many of these are mendable, at least they were in the 1980s excavation. So we're interested in continuing to work here to analyze these bones to see if they're also disproportionately from the right side of the animal, as per Leviticus 7, that the right side of the animal would be the priest's portion. We also would like to draw collagen from the bones so that we can do carbon dating on them and then have another metric of dating for that area. And then finally, around the monumental building, we recovered several altar horns, and we are in the process of publishing this. Actually, several articles are pending right now in publication. COVID was wonderful in that we all got to write more than we had in the past, but we also got a bit backlogged in the actual publication of the articles. Now, this is what Area D looks like. And this is on the eastern slope of the site. If you leave the monumental building I'm describing and go due east, this is what brings you to the favisa, or the bone deposit. Now, Professor Finkelstein's view was that when the Israelites arrived, they scraped the summit and they took the bones and they dumped them in Area D. My view is different. I believe that these were deposited here initially, not secondarily, and that if you go due east of this building, this is where the dump would have been. Now, the challenge with the northern platform, if that's what you prefer for the location of the Mishkan, is that they would be carrying bones uphill and then dumping them here, which is somewhat illogical. But you can see the Iron One silos that are here, and then the balks that remain from the 1980s. In the Area D deposit this summer, we found 2 gold stars. One was 8-sided, one was 9-sided. And just amazing that they survived in this level of condition. You do not lose gold in ancient times. You may lose other things, but if something is gold, they left it behind on purpose. And especially in a deposit like this is, I believe, a motif from that period, and it has great value. We'll be researching that further. And it was recovered through wet sifting. Now, it's amazing the quality that is in, because it's been excavated, it's been dry sifted, it's sheet metal, it's gold, it's very thin gold, and then it's wet sifted, and it survives in that condition. Had we not been wet sifting, that would have been thrown away. So these are what we find. Based on the 4 seasons that we have done at Shiloh and our projects elsewhere, for every 1 small find that we used to find, we now find 4. For example, for every scarab that we used to find, we now find 4 scarabs. They're in the dump piles from the past. They're hard to spot unless you wash the matrix. And so we are wet sifting 100% of the material here at Shiloh. Of course, Reut is doing a good bit of wet sifting also in important loci that are here. So this is what our system looks like. Ultimately, we have established this stratigraphy to this point. And I'll say just a few words about stratum 3. This is one of 3 silver coins that we recovered from AE 31 Locus 5. And what is interesting is the plaque with which you honored me, for which I'm very grateful, had for the freedom of Jerusalem. This is what we have on these coins. These are Bar Kokhba coins, the first ones found at Shiloh, and they are silver from year 3, either year 3 or year 4 of the Bar Kokhba revolt. And this is important because it establishes the time period of the Akrabata toparchy, which is the northernmost toparchy of Judea at the end of the Second Temple period. So beautiful coins that tell us an amazing story. David Raviv and I are publishing an article in IEJ in the coming months on this topic. So this is just a look at some of the amazing finds. This is an artifact-rich site, and it's an honor for us to work here. This is us packing up our gear and leaving and saying goodbye to you. So I think I end with 30 seconds to spare. So thank you very much.
What did you find from the 14th century? Do you think that the tabernacle was here at that time?
I do think that you have an earlier arrival of Israel that does come into the 14th century. Again, these are matters of research. If the EA 288 is indeed referring to Habiru and to a conquest of sorts, then this would give some validity to my theory. Thank you for your question.
What did you find from the 14th century?
The finds from the 14th century, thank you. We have our first clean late Bronze Age locus. There's always been late Bronze Age pottery that we find at Shiloh. All of the digs have found this. The Favisen area D is all late Bronze Age pottery, so clearly the site was occupied at that time. They are living primarily in tents. So this is one reason why buildings and structures that have not been found. They're also primarily reusing Middle Bronze Age structures as well. But we do, for the first time, have a clean, sealed late Bronze Age locus.
What would make it a Hebrew site, being according to your theory?
The question is, what would make it a Hebrew site according to my theory? We study every bone that we find, for example, and we see a change in the proportion of kosher and non-kosher bones as we move from our stratum 7 to our stratum 6, for example. So when you move into late Bronze Age, now you have 0% pig bone, and you had 4% in the previous strata. So these are the types of things that we track. Do we see a change in diet? Do we see a change in other material culture things? Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.